it's just you and me, not only will this be like intense fun, but it'll also be relatively quick. So number one, thank you for making the effort to be here. So there's some things I want to cover, and then I'm going to ask you if there's anything you want to cover, and we will go from there. So the first thing is we have a discussion number 8. Oh, wait, let me start over again. It is October 27th. It is 7 p.m. This is BUA 205-100, and it is a Zoom recording of the meeting at 7 p.m. All right, my name is Mike Willman, and a couple of housekeeping details. Number one, discussion 8 is due on the 30th, which is the end of this week. And as of that discussion, responses like, good thought, Brina, don't count anymore. We need substantive responses. So say whatever you want to say and respond substantively to somebody else, anybody else, but don't say, yeah, good point. That is not a substantive response. Number two, we have an assignment, the third assignment, which is coming up due on the 3rd, which would be next, Tuesday, or election day, which is a good opportunity for me to say, if you haven't voted, vote, assuming that you're old enough and that you're registered. Are you old enough, Brina?
Yes, I am, and I voted.
By email? I mean, by mail.
Yeah, I dropped it off at a ballot.
Good. We should be at this point up to chapter 16 and 17 on quizzes. That would be due on November 1st. I'm saying all this because there are certainly some people in this class who are way behind. And what I can do is make some of the assignments which are past due, I can change the due dates so that people can respond and get a grade. They will not get the same grade they would have gotten if they had done it on a timely basis. But the goal here is that everybody who tries does well. So let's say that if your last name is Boone, you're just a genius. And so, if this is just a piece of cake and you ought to be graduating from law school, not being, in a community college, that's cool. So you get a good grade based on achievement. Other people might not be as brilliant as people whose last name is Boone, if they try, if they make a genuine effort, if they participate, even though their responses might not be substantively as impressive as somebody else's, they will also get a good grade, because I don't think that the material in this class is easy. People spend several years in law school to learn this junk. We're not trying to make lawyers out of you, but we are trying to make you as aware of the breadth of what law applies in the world of business as we can. The vocabulary is different. I mean, every course has its own vocabulary. If this were a calculus class, I wouldn't have any idea what was going on, not because I'm necessarily really dumb, although that may be true, but because I just wouldn't get it. Never did, okay? If this were a class in Russian or Chinese, sorry, wouldn't be something I would be doing well in. Okay. The class had a very disappointing level of participation in the peer review process, which I introduced on the 10th of October. So that was more than 2 weeks ago. And the idea was that you would send your, assignment number 2 paper, which was the reparations for Americans, descendants of slaves, the concept, to the person on the email distribution list right below you. The person right above you, alphabetically, should be sending a paper to you. You're to comment, send the comments back. The idea being that in addition to whatever I might say, you have the benefit, and I think it is a benefit, of somebody else looking at it and saying, I really don't get what you're trying to say, or my gosh, that was just, brilliantly incisive, or whatever it might be. We can't replicate what classroom discussion would be like, but we can try. And so that's one of the ways we try. In that vein, if anybody in this class at any point wants to have a personal, a private meeting, whether it's a phone call, a Zoom call, whatever, I'm delighted to do that. A couple of people in this class have asked for that. I've done it. Sometimes it's like, could you reopen a certain quiz? Sure. Sometimes it's like, I don't get what I'm supposed to do on this paper. And I will try. And I actually extended the deadline on the ADOS paper because somebody convinced me that I hadn't been as clear in my expectations as I could have been. So I will always be happy to do that. Zoom participation, of course, is voluntary. If you're working the second shift at Wawa and can't be here, or if you just, have your favorite TV program, or you've committed yourself to be online playing some game with some friend, or you just want to get another hour's worth of sleep. Nothing I can do about any of that. I think it's one of the shortcomings of asynchronous classes. If this were a synchronous class, it's 2:30 on a Tuesday, you got to be online. It's like not showing up in class, but that going in. And so going into this, people didn't know, or, were aware that they didn't have to be online for anything at the same time as everybody else. We certainly can't change that. But when the participation level is very, very modest, it's disappointing. Let me see. Oh, papers. When you do a paper, even when you submit it through Blackboard, or whether you send it to me via email, however you do that, please, on the paper itself, in addition to on whatever the file folder it might be in would say, just put your name, the course, the date, and the assignment. So when I'm printing all the papers that people submit so that I can read them, as opposed to reading them online, let's say your name is Brina Boone, and you send the paper via email, it certainly says who it's from. But if the paper itself, when I print it, doesn't have that, then I'm forced to go back and, match up the email with the paper. And it's just a pain in the butt. And I prefer not to, waste my time doing that. I'd rather spend my time commenting on the substance of what somebody has written. What else? I have created a grade sheet for the students in this class, which basically sets out what you've done. So as of this point, you've had an opportunity to do 7 discussions that'll be worth 350 points. So let's just say your name is Jones, but you didn't do discussion 3 and 4. That grade sheet should show that, just like the Blackboard gradebook does, but I'm trying to put it all in one place. We've had 15 quizzes that have been due so far. So that means at 100 points apiece, that'd be another 1,500 points. So now we're up to 1,850. We've had 2 assignments, one for 100 and one for 250. That's another 350 points. So basically in this class, if you are sort of cooking along, you should be around 2,200 or more points. So let's just see if we have anybody named Boone in the class. We do. And that person has 2,180 points, which means that she is right where she should be. So we applaud her. We raise a glass of tap water in her honor or something. We have people in this class who have 125 points, 305 points, things like that. I think it would be smarter if you find yourself in that position, for whatever reason, to drop the class. Because although I'll be happy to give you the latitude to make up the points, and I will extend due dates, and I will make it so that if you do all the work, you can at least pass the class. I'm not sure that if you're at that point now, you're going to actually do all that. So if what I'm describing is you, then I think we ought to at least have a conversation about it, okay? I continued, and I mean this sincerely, and most of the time I'm just joking around, but this is totally sincere. I will do everything I can for anybody who is trying. I will bend over backward. I will spend time online with you. I will do whatever we need to do. But if that's just not going to work for you, circumstances have changed. I don't know what, lots of things happen. I think it's something that people have to seriously reconsider. Rewrites. If you wrote the ADOS paper and you got a grade that you think is not the grade you want, or maybe the grade you deserve, you can rewrite the paper. I would suggest that you and I have a conversation about it before you do that, so that at least what my expectations are more clear than they might have been, and that it's worth your effort to do that. I don't guarantee that I will raise the grade, but I will certainly recognize that you tried, you made the effort to make it better. So even if I don't necessarily raise the grade, when we get to the end of the semester, there's always latitude. And unless you're going to, send me massive amounts of cash to bribe me, the best way to make that latitude work in your favor is to have demonstrated effort. Even if the effort falls short, effort counts in my book. Okay. What else? When I send something to you, typically I send it via email. I make an announcement out of it, and I make a message out of it. So that's 3 ways to get it. So for example, when I introduced the concept of peer review, that was in an email to you, it was an announcement I posted, and it was in a message. So I will not accept the response that I didn't know we were supposed to do that. If you tell me that you didn't do it, I'll accept any reason, and it is not my job, in my opinion, to inquire into the truth of the reason. So if your name is Jones and, your family's goldfish died, then it was really a sad moment in the family, and people are coming in from all over the country for the moment when you flush it down the toilet and you want to be there and you can't do your paper. Okay, I'm not going to say that that's an inadequate response. If you're online, I wish you would smile now, because that was really an attempt to be funny. So yeah, what am I trying to say over and over again? That I will figure out some way to work with you if you want me to, whether it's in terms of deadlines, whether it's in terms of content. But if you don't, if you ignore your obligations, then I don't feel obligated to do anything in response. I want you to acknowledge when I send you something that is substantive. If I say, we're having a Zoom meeting tomorrow, if you can't be on it, that's fine. But acknowledge that you got the notice of the meeting, and just say, I don't want to be there. I don't like Zoom meetings. I have a job. My 4 kids are all sick, whatever it is. Okay. So that's what I expect. And hereafter, I'm going to reward responses. So I'm not going to penalize somebody for not responding, but I will give extra credit points to anybody who responds and says, I got your message, Mike, and I'm not going to be on the Zoom call. That counts. Okay. What else? I made a few notes. Let me just check here. We talked about headers, Zoom participation, acknowledgement, extra credit, peer reviews, rewrites, grade sheets. Okay, so the next paper allows you to pick a subject. So Brina, have you picked a subject?
No.
Okay. If you don't like the list of subjects that I supplied in the Blackboard assignment, let's just say abortion is not on that list. I don't remember whether it is, but you want to write a paper on abortion. That would be fine with me. Just ask me, okay? Mm-hmm. And what I had hoped to do, if we had enough people to make a discussion worthwhile, was to talk about 2 things. Number 1, the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett as the new Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and what your reaction was to that, and hoping that you could separate your personal, political, or cultural position from the legislative process that allowed her to be confirmed in this run-up to the election. The other thing I wanted to discuss with you was more complicated. I think every day, I realize you guys don't read newspapers or magazines, but if you picked up a newspaper, if you picked up the Wall Street Journal today, which I'm assuming nobody in this class did, you would see that one of the most important business stories of the day is the Justice Department's lawsuit against Google, calling Google a monopoly. So what I wanted to ask the people participating was, so what's wrong with a monopoly? Do we know what a monopoly means? Okay, so in conversational terms, it means that your strength as a company is so overwhelming that other companies don't have a chance. It would be too expensive to try to compete with you. If we all were starting out to try to make something that ended up being called an automobile, which is kind of the way it was. You had guys named Oldsmobile and Chevrolet, and those were real people who were, and Ford, who were making cars. They were kind of on a level playing field. They didn't all start at the same time. But there wasn't like there was a Mercedes that was already, in the market and dominating the market. So Google has a huge percentage of the search business because it's a really good search engine. And it has even more of the search business because it has negotiated with Apple to be the search engine on Apple's phones. So it's something like more than 95% of the market. From a legal point of view, that is not bad. The question is, does that impact the people who are customers in a way that is bad? So just to be the dominant force in and of itself is not something that the Sherman Antitrust Act says is wrong. But the idea is that there is a notion in the law that we want competition. And when we have competition, that's good for consumers. So if we have one phone company, charge whatever they want. If we have two phone companies, you could say, I'm going with the less expensive one. And that there's a whole line of reasoning about how that drives innovation and it's good for consumers and so on and so on and so on. You and I are not going to discuss that, Brina. I'm just going to ask you to think about it because I don't want to penalize you by boring you to death because you're, good enough to be here on this call. So having gone over the things I want to go over, I do want to ask you what your reaction to the confirmation of Justice Barrett was.
To be honest, I'm not that involved with politics to give her a fair emotion of how I feel about her getting in. I did hear that she didn't do that many cases to be considered, not to be considered a judge, but to get the role of being on Supreme Court. Like she should have a little bit more history, experience. I also heard that her views are basically the opposite of what RBG was all about. And then on top of that, I'm hearing Trump plans on using her as if he loses the election and he wants to sue, that she would kind of be that help to get him to win if he does bring a lawsuit in. So with all of that, I think that's crazy.
Let me ask you, and I'm not asking this to put you on the spot, but when you say that you're not particularly involved in the information process about things like this,
Mm-hmm.
but you had those notions, and I'm going to respond to those notions.
Mm-hmm.
Where does your information come from?
I like to, if I'll Google about people. I do follow when I do go on Facebook, I follow news pages, and I'll read the comments of people. Like, for example, they were saying Obama didn't get a chance. You guys said it was too late in his term, but yet you let this kind of stuff. So I try to go on not one news page that is biased, only pro Biden or only him. I try to go on things that has a lot of positive Trump messages and a lot of positive Biden messages, if that makes sense, so I can make my own decision.
Okay, well, that's good. I was going to ask you if you have any idea where the news that is on the sites you're looking at comes from. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to pick up the New York Times, which people would call, a very well-respected and very liberal paper, or it's another thing to turn on Fox News, which certainly has a very conservative reputation, but that. So there's it's labeled, it has a name, and what to expect based on, what the history of those organizations is. It's if I knew you really well, I would say, oh, she's whatever. She's just, a dyed-in-the-wool liberal and blah, 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 blah. And even
Mhm.
RPG was, too conservative for her or whatever. But we
Mhm.
don't know that. And on a personal basis, it doesn't really matter. But if you're evaluating the information, and it sounds like you've at least made the effort to find sources that would look at it from, at least the two major disparate viewpoints, I think that's commendable. I certainly seen the suggestion that having now a 9-person court with the conservatives being in the majority would, in theory, be a better place for Trump to go if he wanted to challenge the election. I'm going to bet, based on doing this for a long time, that if he were to do that for whatever reason, he will fail. That's not going to happen. The Supreme Court is not going to overturn an election in the way that, and it appears that Trump is going to lose in a landslide. Now, the polls in 2016 turned out not to be correct, so who knows? And it's not my point in bringing this up to have a Trump versus Biden discussion, but I think that, and I think Barrett's reputation, she was an appellate court judge, uh,
Mhm.
and has, I think, she's certainly very conservative, but I think she also has, from that point of view, a relatively distinguished career. So you might not like the positions that you would expect her to take, but I don't think that she lacks experience. And I think that uh, she handled herself, I thought, pretty well in the hearings. I'm going to guess that you did not watch them or didn't have the opportunity to watch them. And who knows whether, it would have made any difference to you. There are true subtleties to this that it's probably not worth your time and mine this evening to discuss. But if I could just convince the people in this class that it was important to vote in 2016,
Mhm.
because whoever got elected was going to have the opportunity to probably to nominate some justices who
Mhm.
would probably be confirmed. And that's happened. So Trump has had the opportunity to appoint or to nominate 3. They've all been confirmed. So for somebody who didn't vote, who would have less than a positive feeling about Trump, to say, well, I would say, did you vote? If you did vote, uh, right now it seems like there's a huge effort to have gotten everybody registered and to get everybody to vote. And the voting ahead of time is way ahead of where it was even at the end in 2016. So it seems like you have a very mobilized electorate, which I would guess, and it's not my point here to sort of be partisan. I'm going to guess that that's not good for Trump. That there are a lot of people who are pissed off and
Mhm.
are going to express themselves, at the ballot box or with their mail-in ballot or whatever. And the polls seem to indicate that, but you never know. But when you win the election, you get to appoint justices. And
Mhm.
if this all hadn't happened, if there had been no vacancies in the ensuing 4 years, and I was talking to this class about it and saying, that's one of the most important things a president can do. You guys, your eyes gloss over immediately anyway, but they would, you'd be asleep and you'd be, playing games online and ordering another pair of Jimmy Choos or whatever it is that you would be doing. And the subtleties of how that's going to work, I think they're fascinating, but I don't expect you guys to even understand them. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I just don't think you have the level of interest that would allow you to evaluate that. There's some things in your lives that, uh, I think if we were discussing, we had a relatively recent decision about gay and lesbian rights and
Mhm.
whether an existing law uh, prohibited, for example, firing somebody because of their sexual preference or their gender identification. And up until that time, there were 28 states in this country, or maybe 27 or 29, but I think it was 28, where if you were a homosexual and I was your employer, I could fire you for that reason, and I would not be breaking the law. I would not be doing something wrong. That has totally changed because of that decision. But there are tons of subtleties to that, and I think maybe relatively young students, which all the people in this class are, maybe that would be something they would understand or care about more than some of the esoteric stuff that. So here's my last question. Well, actually, two
Oh,
questions.
I have two questions too.
Dude,
Um, do you think it's possible, since they're bringing up a lot of what she believes in, um, I feel like personally you should be able to put your feelings and what you believe to the side.
mhm.
So when you make hearings, so I'm kind of confused on why people know so much about what she believes in, and you know, women not having as many rights or whatever she believes in. So if you're making these cases, shouldn't she, what's the word, kind of put her personal feelings to the side and go with.
And I think there's every reason to believe that she will. And I think for most men and women who've been appointed to the court in the past, that has turned out to be true. They might have a more conservative or more progressive way to interpret law, but I don't think you'll find them saying, so I'm voting for gay rights because my son is gay and, you know, whatever.
Mhm.
I think people infer from the fact that she apparently is a very devout Catholic, that she would have personal beliefs, but I think it's easy. Here, I'll give you an example from my legal life. I was a prosecutor in Philadelphia. My job was to convict somebody who'd been charged with a crime. The job of the defense attorney was to not let me do that. All right.
Mhm.
The way the system works is I work my butt off to show that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and your lawyer works his or her butt off to show that you're not. And it's relatively easy to thwart me. I've also been a criminal defense lawyer, and people will say, and you represent Brina? You know, she's like a killer and a monster and a bitch and a blah, 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 blah. And I
Mhm.
say, I don't know that that's true or not, but I don't care, because my job is to not allow the prosecutor to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she did it. That's my job. And I think
Mhm.
judges understand, by and large, that it's their job to make the best possible decision legally. But think about this. You know that there are 9 justices on the court. You know there are a lot of 5-4 decisions. That
Mhm.
means you change one person and you change the law. That seems really stupid. You know, that substituting one personality or one brain for another is going to change how some case is going to be decided. But yet that's the way it is. And so I think that there's a reason to expect that she will be true to her judicial roots and look
Mhm.
at things from what is called an originalist or a textualist point of view. But look at Chief Justice Roberts. When he was appointed, people thought he was a conservative, a purebred conservative. And he has voted with the, quote, liberal majority more and more. Now, there are
Mhm.
people who say it's because he doesn't want the court to appear to render only political decisions, and he's concerned about the reputation of the court. And there's a lot of subtlety to all that. Doesn't matter. There have been lots of occasions where people have been appointed to the court. And, oh, Brina, she's going to vote. She's going to vote to save Roe v. Wade no matter what.
Mhm.
And then the case comes up and it's presented in such a way the issue is not just a woman's right to choose, but there's some more subtle thing to it. And you decide that in that case, on that subtlety, you're going to vote against whatever it is. That doesn't mean you're against Roe v. Wade in its entirety, but people will say, oh, you know, we thought she was a true liberal. Look what
Mhm.
she did. I can't believe a woman of color, I'm assuming you're a woman of color, did that. And you're saying to yourself, I did it because in the circumstances of this case, that in my mind was the right thing to do. It doesn't mean that the whole picture of so-called abortion rights is something that I have a different opinion on than I had, before I wrote this opinion on this case. The subtleties of personality and the subtleties of people's political beliefs are hugely important, but way beyond the purview of this class. So you said you had 2 questions, right?
Oh yeah. So my second question is, so with the last presidential voting, Trump didn't win the popularity vote. He won from the Electoral College. So I wanted to know what the Electoral College does and if you really have a say, I guess,
Well,
in picking the president.
you don't have, it's not, first of all, this is not a democracy. In a democracy, whatever the question is, we'd all vote. We'd all go to the Greek forum, the forum in Athens, and we'd all raise our hands and say, I'm for this or I'm against this. And that's not what we have. We have a republic. So we elect people who will do that for us. When the people drafted the Constitution, this is my take on it, and I'm not going to pretend that I am right. I'm just going to give you my point of view on it. The drafters of the Constitution, basically Madison, who was the primary drafter, didn't trust the people to pick the president for many reasons, none of which need to be part of my explanation. So they created this electoral college system, which sort of assumed at that time that the people who would be selected, and back then they were selected by the state legislatures, not by, well, in New Jersey, you got more votes than I did, so your electors are going to be the ones who vote. And that has changed over time. But the idea was that we're going to have like 270 or more, 270 is the majority, people who know better than the dumb old riffraff sitting around doing whatever. And there are subtleties to that, but the number of electoral votes you have is a function of how many members of Congress represent your locale. Now, keep in mind that we had the Connecticut Compromise, which said, we're not going to have one man, one vote. So thinking now about, we got 38 million people living in California, and they have a bunch more Congress people than Delaware does, which has 600,000 people total. But both of them have 2 senators. And that compromise was that all the little states didn't want to get lost, and they weren't going to ratify the Constitution if they didn't have some mechanism that allowed them to just not be swept away in the tide of wherever the most people resided. And that carries over into the Electoral College. So it's a throwback. It's like, okay, states like Wyoming and Delaware, which both have about 600,000 people, have the same number of senators as New York or Florida or Texas or California. And you might say that's wrong because we have this idea that your vote should be no more powerful than my vote. One person, one vote, or as we used to say, one man, one vote. It ain't that way. And so we've had a number of elections, not just the Trump-Clinton election, where the popular vote winner did not win in the Electoral College. Should we abolish the Electoral College? A lot of people think that. They think that we're at a point where it just ought to be a direct election by all the people voting. Just like when you vote for senator in your state, there's no intermediary. So if you're voting for me as opposed to my opponent, if I get more votes, I win. I go take my seat in the Senate. So it was designed to assuage the fears of the little states. And do we have to live with the legacy of that? I guess, well, certainly we do have to until somebody changes it. But it's like everything else. You can amend the Constitution. So we amended the Constitution to let you vote as a woman. And we didn't do that for 100 years. We didn't do that till 1920, the 19th Amendment. We had a terrible decision by the US Supreme Court in around 1850 before the Civil War saying that people of color, slaves, were not people. They were property. Dred Scott. Took 50 years or more to get to a point where we said, oh, well, sure, they're people, but we don't have to, we can treat them separately. Yeah, we'll treat them as equals, but it can be a separate kind of equal. So, you know, your water fountain, my water fountain, your spot in the bus, my spot in the bus, your spot at the lunch counter, my spot. And it took another 50 years to 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, for the court to say, whoa, that's bullshit. The psychology of the psychological impact of saying you get this water fountain, even assuming it was as good as my water fountain, which it wasn't in most cases, is so demeaning, so disruptive, so psychologically overpowering that we can't do that. So, you know, we got full-blown integration as opposed to continuing segregation. You know, it's only recently that that two people of the same sex can be married and have all those marital rights. There's lots of stuff like that. Maybe this is a good point to end on, because I don't want to use your question to keep you online, you know, longer than we ought to. But there's a school of thought which says, if we think same-sex marriage is where we are now as a country, or as a intelligent populace, then the Congress ought to change the law. It shouldn't be, Congress gets elected. If they do stuff we don't like, we can unelect them. We can't unelect a Supreme Court justice. They're going to serve for life. Mm-hmm. And so to have them making these cultural changes, it might be totally justified, but we don't want the court doing that. We don't want unelected, we want them saying this law is okay or this law is not okay. Not that we're going to make up, in effect, what some people would call new laws. And so I think there are very thoughtful people who say, I don't want the Supreme Court doing that. I want it done, but not by them, because they could just go crazy. I want it done by the people we actually elect to do this, and they got to stop kicking the can down the road. But anyway, was that responsive to what you were asking?
Yeah, actually it made sense, especially with the electoral vote and everything.
Okay, so is there anything, number one, about how this class is unfolded in terms of the housekeeping that has confused you or that we need to fix for you?
No, even with the first paper, I knew it was there. Not just when the day one, I looked through everything. So, I mean, everything's pretty self-explanatory.
Well, that's how it's supposed to be in an asynchronous online class. The other thing is, if at any point there is something that you feel is worth a private discussion, I'm happy to have it. Just send me a note. We can have a Zoom call. We can have a phone call. We can do whatever. So, especially for you, and if the rest of you, anybody watches this, too bad for you. But since you took the time and the trouble to be here and participate, I would doubly bend over backward to be of help to you, because I appreciate people who participate. I understand that, you know, there are reasons why some people can't, but I appreciate it. So, unless there's something else on your mind, we are done.
No.
Whoops. Hold on. There's another person. Angelina. Angelina.
Hello.
Hi. How long have you been waiting?
No, not long. I forgot about it and I was eating dinner with my family.
Okay. We were just about to wrap up. So yeah. I will post the Zoom video on my YouTube channel within a day or two. Is there anything in particular on your mind, as opposed to just, yeah, we're having a Zoom meeting, so I better get on and, you know?
No, there's no questions.
All right. Then
Thank you.
I appreciate the fact that you got on. And Rena and I had fascinating discussions which have changed the course of human history and, you know, all of that, but too bad you don't get to hear what they were. And I will end the second time by saying, if there's something that you feel is worth discussing at some point privately, Angelina, just let me know and we can talk on the phone. We can talk on a Zoom call. We can do whatever. And I will do my best to put you in a position to do well in the class.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, we good, Rena?
Yes.
All right, guys. Thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well and vote.
Bye.
Bye-bye.